Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
I have a friend that I grew up with named Seth, and he's one of my close, dear friends. There's only one small wrinkle in our relationship, which is that we don't actually agree on anything. So we avoid topics that require having an opinion, and that's our key to success. One time, we were having one of our disagreements, and we entered into a 2-week-long radio silence until we decided we'd have a Camp David-style peace summit to resolve our differences. We should do this in a beautiful natural environment by a babbling brook and chirping birds, I say. Predictably, he disagrees and says, Vegas. Vegas was not built with me in mind. My poker face is a big smile where I tell you I have 2 jacks and a 4 of hearts. Aristotle said that the key to true friendship is shared values. Of course, but shared values isn't what brought me to Vegas. It's not why I drove my car into a heat wave there and back to LA in one day until it broke down in the middle of the Mojave Desert, which I spoke about a year ago. I made the trip because of a philosophical corollary to Aristotle, which I call ice cream soup. Ice cream soup is where you take ice cream, mix it around in a bowl until it has the thin consistency of soup, add rainbow sprinkles, chocolate syrup, whipped cream, and banana slices, and enjoy. With your best friend, Seth, who taught you how to make that when you were kids, sneaking into your parents' freezer. I made the trip because the one thing he and I will always agree on is that our relationship matters, and life is better when we're talking to each other. There are sacred bonds that exist between people: friendship, marriage, synagogue, community, covenanted relationship between God and the Jewish people. Whatever your ice cream soup is, with whomever your Seth might be. Ideally, the strength of sacred bonds transcends individual differences of opinion. But we know that's not always the case. No matter the road miles, no matter the fond memories, sometimes differences create a rift too vast to bridge. Many of you have shared with me that personal friendships have dissolved since October 7th because another's view on Israel or on the Jewish people has become so clearly at odds with our own. Elections, which will be upon us soon, can also test relationships to the point of breaking. We know how seemingly impossible it is to engage in difficult conversations that cut to the core of who we are and what we most fundamentally believe. One of the defining challenges of our time is, can we still talk to each other? And should we even try? This week in Parshat Chukat, Moses makes an error so grave, God forbids him from entering the promised land. The same Moses who is handpicked by God at the burning bush, who enacts God's plagues against Pharaoh and Egypt, who leads the people through the wilderness and receives Torah twice, who deals with the people's complaining and attempted mutinies, that Moses is forbidden from entering Egypt because he strikes a rock. God instructs Moses and his brother Aaron, "V'dibartem el hasela le'enehem v'natan meimav." Take the rod and assemble the community and speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will give forth water. Thus you will draw out water from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. But that's not what Moses does. Instead, we read, "Vayarem Moshe et yado vayach et hasela b'matehu pa'amayim." And he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock?" And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. Clearly, Moses fails to follow God's instruction. He's supposed to speak to the rock, but instead he strikes it. Those who rush to Moses' defense say, recall how God instructs Moses at Horeb earlier in the book of Exodus to strike the rock and bring forth water. Why would God command him this second time to take his staff in his hand if God only wanted him to speak to it? But those who try to make sense of God's decree say it has nothing to do with hitting the rock at all. It's the way in which Moses speaks harshly to the people when he calls them rebels, morim in Hebrew. Moses represents God to the people, and much like Rabbi Feinstein spoke about at my installation a couple of weeks ago, people's conception of God is influenced by the face of their rabbi and teacher. So Moses is representing before the entire assembly the image of an angry God, when God, in fact, was happy to provide for their needs in the thirsty desert. Those who defend Moses respond to that by saying, look at the word he uses to call them rebels, morim. It's the same letters as Miriam, the name of Moses' sister who had just died, through whose merit, our rabbis teach, the people had access to a well that traveled with them, because Miriam watched over Moses in the Nile, because Miriam took up her song at the Sea of Reeds. Water was Miriam's special bond with the people, and when she dies, they are left parched. And Moses is tired, and Moses is grieving, and Moses has one moment of weakness. Shouldn't he get a second chance to enter the promised land? But there's one more answer from those who maintain that God's punishment fits the crime. Contemporary Israeli author Tamar Biala explains that Moses' egregious mistake in this moment is that he loses faith in the efficacy of communication. That raising his hand and striking the rock with his staff is in effect throwing up his arms in frustration as he surrenders to communication breakdown. It's a reversion to the Moses of, I am of uncircumcised lips, send somebody else, instead of his continued evolution to the Moses of Deuteronomy, Devarim, which literally means words, where he gives long poetic discourse after long poetic discourse in the eyes of all the people. Striking the rock in this moment is demonstrating in the eyes of the entire congregation that words do not have the power to create miracles. Biala writes, holiness is the ability to communicate and draw out living waters from one another. I think I understand why Moses can't lead the people into the land. We have to develop here a language to communicate. We have to learn to speak to someone whom we experience as a rock. Will we get a second chance? God was about to be glorified through God's greatest miracle yet. The medieval commentator Sforno says, this would have been God's third and highest level of miracle. Level 1 is the common everyday, rain, the sunrise. Level 2 is something that might happen in nature over thousands of years, but is clearly aided along by God's hand to happen in a single moment. Striking the rock is a level 2 miracle because physical actions might conceivably release moisture from a rock. Fine. But mere speech, talking to a rock, that's level 3. God wanted the people to learn that God's greatest miracle is the power of speech to round the jagged edges of our hearts. So when Moses loses faith in our ability to be moved by words, he deals with the Israelites as if he was dealing with Pharaoh, whose heart was hard as stone and could never be softened. Pharaoh could never be moved by words alone. Let my people go had to be followed up with the only miracle he could understand, which was physical. Plagues, death, destruction. That's the only way to strike the hardened heart of Pharaoh. But God believes the people of Israel are different. Moses does too, for his entire career, even advocating for them when God seemingly has enough. But in this moment, Moses loses faith not only in himself, but in us. He finally believes we are merely a bunch of kvetchers and complainers. So he uses the same tools for us that he used on the Egyptians, as if we were no different. He strikes the rock, vayach et hasela, just like vayach et hamitzri, just like he struck the Egyptian taskmaster. That's the sin. He failed to glorify God to the people by showing them the miraculous power of discourse, of what miracles God can perform through our words, if only we have the faith and courage to utter them and the willingness to be moved by them, to bring out the living waters and those we perceive to be rocks. I want to end by saying how grateful I am to you all for installing me and for celebrating the weekend with Rabbi Alex and Noah and me who are here today. The joy and energy and excitement was so palpable, the feeling that the sky's the limit for a synagogue like this, which prides itself in the sacred bonds that exist between people, that understands the miracle of respectful communication and dialogue, despite even chasms of personal difference, because relationship matters, and life is better when we're talking to each other. We can still talk to each other, and we should. May we never lose faith in that, and in the power of Torah's life-sustaining water to soften the jagged edges of our hearts. Shabbat Shalom.